Hi there, my name is Brian Murata. I'm the Attitude Determination Control Lead for the Green Propellant Infusion mission from Ball Aerospace. I'm here to talk about the on-orbit performance of the BCP 100 for this GPIM mission. Real quick agenda, I'll provide a brief program overview, go over some mission objectives, launch and early orbit operations, and the Green Propellant Propulsion System on-orbit tests, and some future planned operations. Real quick background, the GPIM program was awarded back in 2012 to provide NASA a platform to gain on-orbit experience with a green propellant-based propulsion system. The green propellant is AFM 315E, which was developed by the Air Force Research Lab. It provides a higher performance for the same tank volume as standard hydrazine. And additionally, it's a non-toxic propellant, which makes fueling operations much less hazardous. They're able to fuel these things with just street clothes on instead of the full PPE that they usually use for hydrazine. The flight system is comprised of an ESPA class Ball BCP 100 spacecraft bus and the Green Propellant Propulsion System, what we call the GPPS. There's an image there on the right showing the whole flight system with the BCP 100 bus on the top part and the GPPS structure and system on the bottom part of the spacecraft. And the lower picture there is a full picture, of just the GPPS that shows more detail of the thruster orientations and the 5, what we call rocket engine assemblies, the RIAs, laid out around the GPPS. The 4 corner thrusters are highly canted to provide us good control authority when we're using the center thruster, as well as the ability to easily measure the thrust coming out of those thrusters when we perform what we call an IBIT test, which I'll be talking about in a few slides. Additionally, there are 3 secondary payloads that were provided by the Air Force's Space Experiment Review Board, the SUR board. Those experiments are IMACE-R, SWATS, and SOS. They got added later in the program and are mounted in such a way where they can observe into the velocity vector, observe upper atmospheric conditions. They're measuring mostly space weather phenomena. Flight system INT completed in 2015, and we were put in storage until spring of 2019. That delay was, of course, due to the Falcon Heavy development schedule, as we were slated to go up on the 3rd Falcon Heavy launch. Overall mission objectives, of course, the primary objective is to flight qualify the AFM 315E based propulsion system through a series of comprehensive on-orbit demonstrations and tests. We perform characterization of the thruster efficiency over the life of the system across a range of tank pressures to better understand that thruster performance as the system matures and as it ages on orbit. And we accomplish this by measuring what we call the thruster impulse bit, the IBIT, which is a measure of the thruster force applied for a given time. And we've measured this at the beginning of life and then multiple times throughout the mission after every big Delta V campaign that we've done, where we've changed the tank pressure by a great amount. The IBIT is of course going to be correlated back to test conditions, test measurements that were done during INT by Aerojet Rocketdyne. So that way we can correlate how the thrusters have performed over the life of the mission and what their efficiency is. We've also been performing a series of 4 perigee lowering campaigns through the use of a Delta V mode. That's what that image on the right shows. We started off in a roughly 720 kilometer orbit, and through these series of perigee lowerings, we've been gradually bringing in perigee towards 180 kilometers for the end of the mission. Analysis of the orbit changes and the propellant usage is, of course, getting mapped back to expellant propellant efficiency. And also, only lowering perigee provides a wide range of atmospheric conditions for those secondary payloads, those SIR payloads, and gives them really good data to measure those upper atmospheric conditions. Demonstrations of thruster-based attitude control modes also show the capability of the system. These include holding the attitude with the thrusters, managing reaction wheel momentum with the thrusters, and dumping total system momentum, which is the body rates and the reaction wheels, with what we call a thruster detumble. Finally, at the end of the mission timeline, we'll burn the remaining propellant to lower the perigee to roughly under 180 kilometers in altitude, and then we expect the spacecraft to re-enter within a couple weeks. So we launched back 13 months ago now on June 25th in 2019. We were deployed from an ESPA ring off the third Falcon Heavy launch into a 720 kilometer orbit by 24-degree inclination. The first set of ground contacts confirmed that after about a 3.5-year storage period, the spacecraft was performing as expected, which was a good thing. We transitioned to a 3-axis stabilized attitude control mode, and the spacecraft checkout was completed within the first 24 hours of the mission. We followed an incremental and measured approach to the propulsion system checkout, starting with simple tests and gradually increasing in complexity. First, we checked out the primary and redundant cap bed heaters, where we ran both of those sets of heaters for 60 minutes on each thruster to confirm that the proper thermal conditions were reached. We then vented the prop lines and opened the latch valve, and that plot, on the right there is the attitude error from when we opened that latch valve, and we could see that it wiggled the spacecraft. We then performed a series of 200 millisecond long pulses on each thruster with the reaction wheels controlling attitude to verify that each thruster fired and that the system saw a response to those thruster firings. Finally, we performed a short closed loop delta V to verify that the closed loop control mode executed as expected and for the correct amount of time. After we checked out the propulsion system, we turned our focus to taking our first IBIT measurement on orbit. This full IBIT measurement is a complex series of operations designed to perform 120 fixed width thruster pulses without any active attitude control. So the sequence begins where we do a 60-second long delta V to warm the thrusters up to operational temperatures. That's then followed by commanding the reaction wheels to 0 RPM while the thrusters maintain attitude. So that lets the wheels spin down without disturbing the spacecraft attitude too much. And then we kind of let everything settle for 10 seconds and quiet the spacecraft before we commence with the full IBIT measurement, which is 30 pulses on each thruster. They're each 200 milliseconds long, and they're spaced 10 seconds apart. What this does is it, of course, starts the spacecraft in motion as each pulse provides some thrust, and then taking the star tracker measurement of that motion, we're able to back out what the thrust imparted on the spacecraft was for each of these pulses. We have no rate sensor on board, so we have to maintain a valid star tracker measurement through the whole test. And so we do this test in eclipse, so that way, as the spacecraft rotates and as the star tracker field of view rotates, we don't have to worry about the sun coming into the field of view and blinding the star tracker. So then using the change in the measured spacecraft attitude and the rate, we are able to back out the thruster force as applied. And of course, we have known physical properties and configuration, such as the inertia, the thruster locations, et cetera. And we include that in a MATLAB-based finder to then come up with the measured IBIT. So the first IBIT that we performed, we actually did an abbreviated version of the full IBIT, where we performed 40 pulses of the 120. I wanted to confirm that the test sequence was sound prior to doing the full 120 pulse measurement, and also provide me an opportunity to make any adjustments as needed. So I used the IBIT finder to extract the force estimates from this abbreviated IBIT test. I passed those results from the on-orbit test into my dynamic simulation to allow me to compare the on-orbit results and the dynamic results. And it provided me a good correlation to see that the IBIT finder was well matching the on-orbit results and providing expected results. That allowed us to then perform the full IBIT measurement. Using the dynamic simulation, I had to adjust the pulse widths on some of the thrusters to account for variations in the valve closure times, because each thruster has a slightly different valve closure. So by adjusting those pulse widths, it allowed me to balance the system out a little bit more. And then I've used those same pulse widths for all the ensuing IBIT measurements. And then this way, throughout the life of the system, we're able to compare back apples to apples comparison between all of these measurements. And of course, we were able to complete the full IBIT test without blinding the star tracker, which is also a good goal to have. So the rate from the back difference of the attitude, that plot in the lower left shows the spacecraft motion over the full IBIT measurement and the full 120 pulses. And then the measured IBIT per pulse is shown there on the plot on the right, comparing the abbreviated results with its slightly longer durations because of the longer valve delays. That's why some of those IBIT results are higher. And then for the adjusted results for the full IBIT, you can see the consistency there that we're able to achieve. After we completed that first IBIT measurement, we were then able to do the first perigee lowering, where we were targeting a perigee altitude of 575 kilometers. And this was to ensure a 25-year reentry decay would be met in case we never fired the thrusters again. So we performed 3 burns, each 6 minutes long, centered about apogee crossing times, and we got down to 545 kilometers in perigee. And of course, once the thrusters reached a steady state operation, we saw a very excellent pointing performance for the full duration of the Delta V, where our attitude to error is held to within a half degree or so about each axis, which is really excellent performance. The center plot shows our duty cycles, nice and steady. And of course, the plot on the right shows that resulting change in orbital altitude on the final Delta V that we performed of these 3 burns. So lowered down under 505 kilometers, we performed a set of attitude control demonstrations. The first one being we enabled the thruster-based attitude control for full orbit, showing that our pointing accuracy was better than a half degree, while also accumulating a lot of thruster pulses, which applies towards a mission goal of trying to rack up about 11,000 total pulses over the life of the system. That attitude error plot on the right shows what the pointing performance looked like during that full orbit of thruster-based attitude control. We then performed thruster-based reaction wheel momentum management, where we disabled the torque rods and inserted some momentum into the wheels and showed the ability for the thrusters to bleed off that momentum, which is a capability that would really be required for deep space missions where you wouldn't have the torque rods. We then did a thruster detumble test in which the overall system momentum was increased by maneuvering about a single axis and holding a high wheel speed. So we inserted body rate and wheel momentum to give total system momentum, something for thruster detumble to work on. And the thrusters were enabled and they dumped that momentum to emulate a situation where, if the reaction wheels were saturated and the spacecraft is tumbling, this is a mode that would let you take the wheels out of the system and just turn on the thrusters and regain control of the flight system. The final demonstration consisted of performing an off-pulse Delta V, where the center thruster, RIA 5, is committed a 100% duty cycle, and the corner thrusters were off-pulsed control. And that was achieved through the flexibility of just a table parameter update, where we can just change those table parameters and change the way in which this control mode operates. And in conclusion, as of right now, early July, I guess we're almost to early August at this point, but we've performed 7 IBIT measurements on orbit. We have 2 more planned. Perigee lowering campaigns have been completed, and we've reached 400 and 300 kilometer altitudes in perigee. Our final orbit lowering burns will target a perigee of roughly 180 kilometers. We expect to use up all the remaining propellant during the final set of burns, and we expect that the spacecraft should re-enter within 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks due to atmospheric drag. I think right now we're experiencing a low solar activity, so the atmospheric drag, it might take us a little while longer than 2 weeks to re-enter. We expect to perform these burns starting in mid-August and probably completing by the end of August, at which point the mission will pretty much be done. And GPIM has accomplished what it was designed to do. We flight qualified a brand new domestic propulsion technology on a very capable and flexible spacecraft platform. And of course, remaining flight operations will continue to provide valuable data on how this propulsion system performs as it ages. Additionally, thanks to the development of the technology on GPIM, work has continued on advancing green propellant-based systems with their use already planned for future missions. And with that, this completes my presentation on GPIM.